Hello, everyone. Good evening. Can you please let me know in comments whether you can hear me and see me fine? Please let me know if you can hear me fine. Okay, so let's just wait for a couple of more minutes and then we'll start. Just waiting for more people to join the stream. In the meantime, I'll quickly give a brief introduction about Laravel Nagpur. So we are a community of Laravel developers from a city called as Nagpur in India. It is located centrally in India. And we have been conducting these meetups every month since February 2019. So I believe initially we were doing it as a in-person meetups. Then since the pandemic started, we have moved to online version. And I don't think we'll be moving back to in-person meetups anytime soon. So I think we can start now. So today we have Luke Downing with us, and Luke is a full stack web developer from England. He loves Laravel for its beautiful simplicity and tries to reflect that same care and attention in his work. He is a regular contributor to open source, and he tries to help others do the same. The most recent of his open source contribution is, of course, the work he's been doing in Pest PHP. I'm not sure how many of you follow Pest PHP or Luke, but you should go ahead and follow Luke on Twitter and Pest PHP as well. He was one of the first person apart from Nuno to join the Pest PHP team, as far as I know. And he has been adding some awesome features to Pest since he joined the team. And of course, I see Nuno also joined the stream. Thanks, Nuno, for joining. Okay, so, and in today's talk, Luke will be telling us all about Pest and how to perfect the art of writing tests with Pest PHP. Luke is currently on a holiday, and that is the reason he has pre-recorded this talk. However, he's available in the live chat, and he'll be with us in the live chat all throughout the talk. And towards the end of the talk, he'll also join the stream to take any questions that you all might have. So please stay till the end of this talk. The duration is about 40 minutes. And so without any further ado, let's start. I'll quickly start the talk now. Give me a moment, please.
Hey everybody, I am super excited to be here. Thank you so much for coming along and listening to my talk. I'm thrilled to be talking about Pest again. It's amazing to be able to even speak at conferences. And I just want to say, I don't know, 6 months ago, I would never dream that I would be doing this today. So it is insane that I am able to. Thank you so much to everyone who has a part in organizing things like this. It is amazing for the community. It really gets us all excited about code and Laravel and open source and all the rest of it. So thank you so much for coming along and supporting. My name's Luke Downing. You can find me on Twitter at LukeDowning19. I'm actually currently on holiday, so this talk is pre-recorded, but I'm in the chat. So I'll be on the chat talking now. If you have any questions, ideas, suggestions, thoughts, drop them in the chat. I'll respond in real time. So in a way, it's even better than a live talk. Failing that, this is Pest to Perfection. I really hope you enjoy. Just a little bit about me, in case you don't know who I am. I'm a developer from the United Kingdom. I own my own company, Downing Tech, but I freelance for lots of companies. Primarily, I'll be starting freelancing for Worksome soon, so I'm really excited about that, and no doubt I'll be talking about that on Twitter in the near future. I've been using PHP professionally for around 8 years, so I'm quite familiar with PHP, and I picked up Laravel around Laravel 5, so I've been using Laravel for a little while too. I'm a member of the Pest PHP core team, so I help daily with maintenance and adding new features. So I am a little bit biased with this topic, I guess, but I want to say that I wasn't, how can I put this? I wasn't invested in PHP or Pest PHP from the beginning. I was actually added as a core member fairly recently after I picked Pest up, really enjoyed it, and started creating content and adding features to Pest. So I guess the bottom line is that I am absolutely a lover of open source software. I think it is incredibly important. I think it's the reason pretty much everyone here has a job. And I don't think that programming would be anywhere near as enjoyable without it. Which is why I think it's really our responsibility to look after and care for open source. It's something that's been placed in our hands as an amazing tool, but we have to care for it. We have to put the time and maintenance and effort in. So if you've not jumped into the world of open source yet, into contributing and helping maintain things, try it. Just try it. It doesn't have to be anything big, and I guarantee that you won't feel you've wasted your time. I think the most important thing here is to explain what Pest PHP actually is. You've probably heard of Pest. If you haven't, then I'm sorry. Hopefully I can explain exactly what Pest is in this talk. But the bottom line is that it's really a testing framework that sits on the shoulders of PHP Unit. So PHP Unit is the testing framework that comes out of the box with Laravel, and it's super powerful, like really powerful, and it's very stable. I have never experienced a bug in PHP Unit. It is extremely stable. And that means that Pest has an amazing head start. Now, what does Pest offer that PHP Unit doesn't? Well, Pest, rather than going for classes and methods, instead opts for a jest-like functional syntax. So you don't write methods, you write functions. And that removes a lot of boilerplate around your test code. It was created by Nuno Maduro, so Nuno works for Laravel if you didn't know. And that means that Pest is tailored towards the Laravel community. Now, it can be used in bare PHP, it can be used with Cake PHP, it can be used with Symfony, it can be used with any PHP project, but it's tailored for Laravel. And you'll see that as you start using it. It becomes very obvious that Nuno was thinking of Laravel users. Currently, it has over 600,000 installs, and that number is growing rapidly. I think we're entering the Pest golden age, so I just want to say, go pick it up. You don't have to use it professionally. If you don't like it, fine, but at least try it. Don't be one of those people who just hate on something for no good reason. Go try it in a personal project. I think you're going to absolutely love using Pest. This talk is split into 3 sections. The first is writing a basic Pest test. If you've never used Pest before, how do you get started? What's the first test you write? So I'll do that for us, and I'll walk you through how to write a Pest test. We'll then refactor that Pest test to use higher order tests, and I'll show you how that can really make your testing code more readable and easier to maintain. In part 2, we're going to refactor one of our tests to use datasets instead of repeated code. And this is a really powerful concept. It's similar to data providers in PHP Unit, although I will say there is a lot of boilerplate to PHP Unit providers. Datasets are super easy to use. I use them all the time because of how quick it is to build one out. In part 3, we're going to go a little crazy, and we're going to refactor some code to domain-specific language. Now, if you're not familiar with that term, don't worry. It's basically a fancy business term for an API that is surrounded by the business logic. So I think Alex from the Pest core team put this best in this little snippet I have. A higher level, more expressive API based on your business terminology It's easy to read and understand, not just for the developers, but also for the rest of the team. So I want to show you how Pest's functional style plays perfectly into the hands of a domain-specific language. I think you're really going to enjoy that section of the talk, but before we get there, let's jump into our project and write some initial Pest tests. In this project, we have a web.php file, as most Laravel projects do, and you can see we have 3 routes: a login route, a register route, and this profile route here. As you'd expect, the login and register route are behind the guest middleware. So basically, if you're a guest, you can see these pages. If you are not a guest, if you're authenticated, then it redirects. Our profile route is the opposite. It's behind the auth sanctum middleware, which means if you are a guest, you are forbidden and redirected to login, whereas if you're a user, you can see this page. However, we have this custom secure username routes middleware, and this is going to ensure that only you can see your profile. So each user has a unique username. If your username is not this here, you won't be able to see this particular profile. So George couldn't see Luke's profile, for example. That's a basic overview of this application. It doesn't do tons, but it's enough to get us started with Pest. I'm going to head over to the terminal here, and I'm going to create our login test file. And as long as you have the Laravel plugin installed, then you can run php artisan pest:/test, and we'll call this login test. And you'll see that Pest goes ahead and creates the login test for us, which is super useful. Let's jump into that login test, and we'll see that Pest has actually already set up a test for us. Let's see if this works. I'm going to run pest, which is an alias I have for vendor bin pest, and you'll see that we actually have a passing test, which is amazing. We didn't write any code, we already have a passing test. And this works because basically the login route has no middleware, it has no authentication, and anyone can access it, which is why we get a response of 200. So while this is awesome, I actually want to write our own tests. So I'll remove this base test, and we'll start with the it function, which is basically one of the test functions you can use in Pest. There's also test, but both have the same arguments. The first is a description of the test, so it can be accessed by a guest. The second is a closure, and this closure is going to contain our testing code. So inside the closure, we can make use of anything in the PHP unit test case. So any PHP unit code, more or less, is valid inside this closure. That means we have access to this because this has been rebound to the closure, which means that we can say this get root login and assert that it's okay. And if we run this, you'll see we have the same passing test. Awesome. That wasn't too difficult, was it? Let's write our second test. It cannot be accessed by a user. We'll open up our function again, and we want to say this, and then we need to authenticate as a user, and we can use the be function or method in Laravel for that. We need to pass in a user, so let's say user factory, and instead of using create, I'm actually going to use make so that we don't persist to the database. In this case, we don't need to. It makes our test faster. So yeah, this be a user factory make, and then we want to say get the root login and assert a redirect. And let's just break this onto a few lines so that it's easier to read. We'll run our suite again, and now we have 2 passing tests. Well, that was easy. We were able to do that very quickly, and we have now tested that this page does what we'd expect. But before we copy this over to the register route, I think we should spend some time refactoring these to higher order tests. Now, I want to just talk about why we do this. Some people are of the opinion that you should just write your tests and then move on, that you shouldn't spend long writing tests. I actually disagree with that for the same reason that I would say it's always worth it to refactor your code. You are going to have to maintain your tests for the lifetime of the application, And often the tests actually live longer than the underlying code. So in my opinion, it is paramount that you spend time making sure your tests are easy to understand, are easy to maintain, and make sense not just to you but to other people. So higher order tests in Pest PHP give us that superpower. They give us the opportunity to really think about our test code. They also remove a lot of boilerplate, which makes it easy to read. So let's refactor our first test here to higher order. In order to do so, I just remove this closure. I close the it method out, and I'm going to remove the boilerplate from the bottom of this here. We'll remove a call to this so that we end up with a chained method call. It can be accessed by a guest, get the root login, and assert OK. This is a higher order test. However, as you've probably already guessed, when I run this, I get a failure. The failure is that the target class URL does not exist. And this is actually happening because it's attempting to execute this root helper, which requires the Laravel container to be booted. But at the time of it being executed, Laravel doesn't exist because create application in our base test case hasn't yet run. So we need a way to defer the execution of this root helper. Well, you probably know that in PHP we can defer things using closures. And that would fix our problem. But if we run this, it's going to say that argument 1 must be of type string, but a closure has been given. So how can we fix that? Well, seeing as we have access to the test case, why don't we create our very own version of the get method in Laravel? Let's go to that test case, and let's say I want to override get. And you can see that PHP Storm has shown us that this is indeed an overridden method. And we will return parent get, just like that. And I'm going to pass in URI and headers. But instead of just passing in the URI, which would be a string, I'm going to say, give me the value of the URI. And in case you didn't know, value returns the default value of the given value. It's a Laravel helper function that you should be using all the time because it's so handy. You see all it's doing underneath is checking if it's an instance of a closure, and if it is, it executes the closure. Otherwise, it just returns the value. In this case, it basically means that when we run it, it all works. Now, it can be accessed by a guest, it cannot be accessed by a user. And if we come back to our login test, we have a beautiful higher order test. And if we compare these two tests, I think you can see why taking the time to refactor to higher order is worth it. How beautiful is that first test? Let's convert our second test to higher order. So we remove this closure. Let's get rid of the boilerplate at the bottom. We'll remove the call to this, and then we'll reformat. Now we already have handled this get here. We can pass a callable to that. But if we run our tests again, we have another error, unknown format first name. And the reason is exactly the same as our previous error, but just on a different method, this time B. The factory requires Laravel to be booted, and at this time it hasn't been booted. So we may think, well, let's override B, and let's allow that to also be a closure. We can do that, but I actually think there's a better way in this case. Seeing as we're going to be authenticating as users a lot in this application, it would make more sense if we created a helper method called asUser. And let's allow us to pass in an optional username. So if I pass in Luke, it will create a user with the username of Luke. Okay, let's make that happen. So we'll get rid of this call to B. We'll say asUser, and then we'll go back into our test case and we'll create the asUser method. AsUser that accepts an optional string of username, and it's going to say this be user factory, and we can use the state helper to make this work. If there is a username, then pass in the username, otherwise pass an empty array, and then please make the user. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Basically, we've removed the manual call to creating the user using a user factory, and we can simplify it to a call to as user, where we can customize the username if we want. If we now come back here and run the tests again, you'll see that they are passing. And that means that we have actually refactored both of these tests to beautiful higher order tests. I hope that you follow. I hope you can see why refactoring to higher order tests is a good idea, and how with a little bit of tweaking we can actually build out insanely useful helper methods that increase our speed when we're writing tests later down the line. I think we're ready to move on to our redirect tests. So let's say PHP artisan pest test. I did say redirect, I meant register test. And if you don't like pest test and you'd rather use make test, which is probably what you're used to with PHP unit, don't forget that you can customize stubs in Laravel. So you can customize the test stub and just replace it with a generic pest file. Okay, so if you prefer to use PHP artisan make test, that is entirely possible. I'm going to copy this code here, and we'll open up that newly created register test, drop our code in, and remember to replace login with register. And if we run pest again, we now have 4 tests, 2 test register, 2 test login. Now it's a little bit annoying that we had to copy and paste our tests. It can lead to false positives, it can lead to errors, and the more you have to copy and paste in tests, the more annoying things become. So we'll try and tackle that a little bit later, but in the meantime, I want to move on and take a look at a more complex set of tests. And we can do that in a test case I created earlier called the profile root test. So we'll boot this up, and you can see we have 3 tests here. If I run those tests, you can see under profile root test we have it cannot be accessed by a guest, it can be accessed by a user called Luke, but Luke's profile cannot be accessed by anybody but Luke. So no other user can access my profile. Can we refactor these to higher order? Well, for the most part we can, but I wanted to put this test here in to show you that it's okay to not refactor in certain cases. So it is actually possible to refactor this to higher order, but it would take a lot of work because we actually have to implement our own version of assert redirect, which would mean returning a custom test response from the get method. So it would be basically a ton of work for very little benefit. And in this case, it makes much more sense just to leave it as a standard closure. It's readable, it's easy to see, and the effort doesn't justify the work it would take. So I'm not saying that every single test you write has to be done in higher order. I'm just saying make sure that you've checked whether or not it can be done easily in higher order first, rather than just passing it off and leaving it. So with that in mind, let's move to our second test, which can be refactored quite easily to higher order. So we'll close that off early. We'll remove the boilerplate as before, remove the call to this, refactor. We can now use our as user helper, and we'll just pass our username of Luke in there. And for the get method, we can pass a closure. If we run it again, we are going to have a passing test, and this is now higher order. Let's move on to our third test, which is somewhat more complex. Basically, in this one, we have a bunch of users, and we loop over each user, and we check that everyone is forbidden because they aren't Luke. Okay? Now this is okay. It works. You can see it passes. But our eyes are drawn to this array, and this array isn't important. As long as Luke isn't in these users, it could be anything. What's important is this piece of code here. So can we refactor this in a way that would draw our eyes to the actual code rather than to the data that we want to provide the code with? We can, using something called datasets. And they're as easy as chaining on a with method. So we chain a with method like that, pass an array, and seeing as we have an as user helper now, I think it would be best if we just reduce all of these users down to their usernames. And we'll grab all of them and we'll drop them in this array at the bottom here. And as soon as we make use of the with method, we're actually able to receive one of these usernames in the function, in the closure that we pass for our test. So with that in mind, we can now remove this for each. And rather than saying B, we can say as user and pass in the username. And if we run this, we've actually got an error called to member function get on null. So why would that be being caused? Let's have a look. I never return from as a user. That's fine. Let's run it again. And you'll see we don't just get 3 tests. We now get a load of tests, 1 test for each username in this array. I think that's really powerful. And if we want to add another user, for example, let's say Steve, we run this again, you'll see that Steve gets added. And anywhere that we use this, or these set of users, we're going to be able to run lots of tests very quickly. So it's really powerful for writing out large test sets in very little time. One thing that's annoying about this is the fact that if I wanted to use these usernames again, I'd have to repeat myself. I'd have to copy this array, paste it, copy it, paste it. I don't want to do that. Luckily, Pest has already come up with a solution to this called shared datasets. So we can say PHP artisan pest dataset, and let's create a dataset called usernames. You can see that it builds a file inside the datasets directory called usernames.php. I'm going to preemptively copy this array, and then let's head to the usernames file. Inside this file, you'll notice it's used this dataset function. And the dataset function takes 2 arguments. The first is the name of the dataset. It's called it usernames based on what we passed here in the command, but you can call this whatever you want. The second is the data that should be returned. So I'm going to replace that function with this array of usernames. Let's head back to our code, and I'm going to say with usernames, and then I'm going to run this test again. And you'll see we have the exact same result, but now we've abstracted the data to a shared location, so any test can make use of that data set very easily. And we'll see an example of that a little later on. Second question, can we refactor this to higher order tests? Well, you may think no, and you may just give up thinking there's no point, but I want to show you that it's actually quite easy, and it will simplify this test and make it look absolutely gorgeous. Let's start by removing the boilerplate as we usually do with higher order tests. Reformat. Obviously, if we run this now, we're going to get an error, undefined variable username. In other words, it doesn't know what this is supposed to be. Well, just as we did for the get route, wouldn't it be nice if we could pass a closure in here? And what if that closure received the current data set? So if we were testing with the username of Nuno, then this would be Nuno. But the next test, when it tests, say, with Frake, this would be Frake. Let's just fix the closure there while we think about it. And then we'll head into our as user, and we'll say that this doesn't have to be a string. It can be a string or a closure. Now we're going to make use of the value function again that Laravel provides. So we'll say, give me the value of username, but I want to pass it an argument. The argument I want to pass it is whatever data you gave me for this test. So yeah, execute the closure. If it's just a string, I'm just going to pass the string straight in. But if it's a closure, I'm going to pass in any data that I was given. So if we come back and now we run this test again, you'll see that we receive all of the data in a higher order test. So you can actually make use of data sets inside higher order tests using the get provided data method. And it's really powerful. There are so many cool things you can do with that. So I encourage you to go check out data sets, higher order tests, play around and see what you can come up with. All right, I think this is looking really neat. So it would be a good time to move on to part 3 of our talk. Let's head back to our login test. Remember earlier we copied and pasted this into register, and I was saying it's annoying that we have to copy and paste. You may now, after part 2 of this talk, think, well, datasets are the answer. Why don't we create a dataset that includes all of the routes that we want to test behind the guest middleware? And then we'll just perform these tests once, but we'll pass the dataset in. So we can say like with guest routes, for example. Now this works. I've used this paradigm before, but it falls short in a couple of places. First of all, what if there are extra tests that you want to perform on that particular route? That means that your tests are in 2 separate locations and it becomes difficult to maintain. And if you have a large team, people will forget that there is a dataset for a particular idea. And so what they'll end up doing is just implementing the test manually. And so you'll have a mixture of manual tests and dataset tests. You do not want that. I think there is actually a much better way. I've been playing with this idea for a few weeks with my friend Sam Rowden, and we really like it. We think it's super powerful. I can't wait to see what the Laravel community can come up with, because I think that they could take it to the next level. We are going to write a domain-specific language for testing, and we're going to use Pest to do it. Imagine if we could inspect a route. So what if we could say, I'm going to come into this test case and I want to inspect the route login. And I want to say, look, it can be accessed by a guest, but I want to check that anyone who is in that username array or usernames array dataset is forbidden. So inspect login, check that it can be accessed by a guest, but check that it forbids any of those users. Let's go ahead and see if we can build this domain-specific language. We need to obviously add our inspect function somewhere, and the best place to do that kind of stuff is in the pest.php file. So we'll add a function called inspect. It receives the route that we're interested in inspecting. And why don't we return a new class that we can build our Fluent interface with? So return new tests, DSL for domain-specific language. This is obviously not documented anywhere, so we can do whatever we want. We can call it anything we'd like. But yeah, I'll go tests DSL route inspector, and we'll pass in the route we were given. Okay, let's go to tests and create a new directory called DSL. And in DSL, let's create a new class called route inspector. Awesome. So now we have our route inspector. We can try running this again, but it's going to say there is no method called guest. Let's add our method, public function guest. It's going to be Fluent, so we'll return this. And inside here, we need our test to ensure that you can log in as a guest. So we'll come back to the login test here, and let's copy and paste this test. We know that this works. Also in the constructor of this, we want to say, make the route that was passed in a member of this class. And that allows us to use it here. So we can say this route, just like that. Okay, if I come back to my login test now and I comment this out, and let's close guest off early and run pest, you can see that login test actually did run our DSL because it can be accessed by a guest was executed. So the first part of our DSL is up and running. How cool is that? I think that is so clean. Okay, let's continue. Let's try and add this forbids method. So we'll come back to our route inspector. We'll add a new function, public function forbids. And we'll say, look, you can pass in a data set. It's going to return itself. So return this. And let's come back to our login test. We'll copy this test because this is checking that they can't access it. And we can replace this with this route. Like that. If we run this, it's actually going to work. It executes, but it's not making use of our data set. However, we've already done all the work in the previous tests to add this functionality very quickly. So we can say as user, pass a closure, receive the username and return that username. And we can say with, pass in the dataset. And if we run this again, you're going to see that our login test just received a bunch of extra tests for absolutely nothing, for free. If we go to the usernames dataset and we add another name in here, let's say Tom, and we run this again, you'll see that Tom is added here and here. So we're getting extra tests for absolutely no work at all. And our login test looks as simple as this. We built all of these tests with a line of code. How cool is that? I really hope you can see how impressive DSL, thanks to the functional style of Pest, could be. There could be packages for Laravel around authentication, routing, mail, storage, everything, and it would help people to be able to very quickly come on board with testing and build out amazing test suites in literally minutes. Okay, but you may be thinking, it's a little bit set in stone. There will be routes that don't want to check, for example, that a guest sees 200. They want to check that you see particular text. Well, two things. There's nothing, for one, to stop us writing an actual pest test here. So it shows the correct info. Okay, so we could write our own pest test here, and this will actually fire alongside our DSL tests. But maybe there's a better way. What if we could define what success is on a DSL test case basis? So in this case, we receive the response, and we'll say response assert C, please log in. And if you're wondering where that comes from, you'll see that our login route just returns please log in. So what if we could define our own success handler? Well, let's make that a thing. We'll go back to our route inspector, and let's say private success handler. And by default, the success handler is going to just say, here's the response assert OK. But if you use the success method, which is fluent, so we'll make it return this, then we're going to say, here's the success callback. We'll say this success handler equals success callback. Okay, that's all of the boilerplate we need to write to make this work. We now just need to make sure that guest makes use of it. And to do that, we're going to have to go back to using a function. And the reason for that is we need to be able to pass the result of get into our callback. So we can add a closure here, and we can say this success handler for this get this route, just like that. Now, when I run this, it's actually going to fail. And it's going to fail because it's going to say call to undefined method success handler. The reason this fails is because this closure has been rebound. So this no longer refers to the route inspector. However, we can fix that by simply saying route equals this route, success handler equals this success handler, and then we can refer to them using those variables rather than using this. So success handler route run tests are now passing. And to show you that that did actually work, if I head back to my login test and change this to please can you log in and run again, we're going to get an error. It's going to say failed asserting that please log in contains please can you log in. How awesome is that? We can now define custom success handlers on a test by test basis. Let's copy this. Let's go into our register test, and we can remove all of these functions now and replace it with some very simple DSL. If we don't need to specify custom success logic, we simply leave it out and you'll see that our register test passes just fine. But if we want to say something like, please register, run again, it's going to say, failed setting that please log in contains please register. So let's take a look at why that would happen. I tell you why it would happen, because I never changed login. This is actually inspecting the register route. Run again, everything works. I'm not going to go any further because we could be here all day, but I hope that you can see the power that is made available to you with Pest. There are some insane things and territories that people haven't even thought about yet that are made possible thanks to Pest. And I think we're going to see some amazing things from the community coming very soon as Pest continues to increase in popularity. Okay, we are done with the code. I just want to finish by talking a little bit more about why you should use Pest. First of all, it's simple and it's easy to read. There is no boilerplate, there is nothing to get in the way. The only thing that will be in that test case are your tests. You'll see a nice description written in plain English, or even in a foreign language. If you aren't native English, you can write those descriptions in whatever language you want. You can use symbols, you can use spaces, you can use special characters, you can use anything to describe your tests. And especially with higher order tests, everything is just so readable. It's a pleasure to write. It's easily understandable when you come back to your code 6 months down the line. You probably didn't realize this, but there are no namespaces in Pest. Now you can add namespaces, for example, if you have duplicate function names, but by default, there is no need for namespaces. And you may think, well, why is that a plus? Basically, it means that refactoring your test suite is as simple as dragging and dropping the file. You don't have to go in and change the namespace. You don't have to rely on an IDE to do the work for you and probably get it wrong. You literally take the file in your Finder, you drag it, you drop it into a different directory. It couldn't be any simpler than that. I already discussed this, but the test names are so easy to understand. And in the terminal, they just read like documentation. In fact, you could take the output of your terminal and present that to your boss, to the client, to whoever, and they have a full list of exactly what your application does. How awesome is that? Higher order testing is a real boon. It helps you to slow down and just think about how to make your tests better. In my opinion, that will save you time in the long run, and it will make your testing experience more enjoyable. True story here, we have a project that it's not legacy, but it's big, right? 4,000 plus tests. And the tests were kind of an afterthought a little bit. We were just shoving things in there to make sure that everything worked properly. I actually hate going into that project now. Not just the tests, but the project itself. And the reason is the tests. I know I want to carry on writing tests, but everything is just so difficult. But because when writing higher order tests, you slow down a little bit, you think about what you're writing, then the test suites remain as beautiful as the code. And adding new tests becomes enjoyable. Now, we talked about this at the beginning of the talk, that Pest PHP is tailored for Laravel, but that is actually a huge bonus that deserves consideration. We class ourselves as artisans. We use Laravel because it's gorgeous, because it reads well, because it allows you to write simple and yet powerful code. Pest is written in the same style. It was designed to give you ultimate power. It was designed to allow you to use all of the sharp knives, but in a way that is beautiful, easy to understand. And so going from a Laravel application from your source code into your test suite feels just as beautiful. There's no gap, there's no distinction. It's not like, oh, I have all of this boilerplate here, but my Laravel application is so beautiful. It feels correct. It just feels right with Laravel. I can't stress that enough. I've used Pest in a good number of professional projects now, and I can say that I prefer it 100% over any other testing framework for the fact that it just fits with Laravel so beautifully. And I hope you've seen that it's extremely powerful and flexible. from datasets to higher order tests to higher order expectations, which we didn't talk about today, but which you should certainly go and check out, to full domain-specific language as and when you require it. Pest is unparalleled when it comes to its power and flexibility. And I just hope you've had a sniff, a snippet, a morsel of that power and flexibility today. Finally, I want to say a huge thank you again for coming and listening to my talk. I really hope you enjoyed it. I hope it gave you some ideas. I hope you can get out there and start contributing to Pest, to the open source community, to Laravel, and just enjoy your time. We are amazing. We have an amazing privilege to be able to write code that can change lives, not just your life, but the lives of other developers. Like, the code we write in open source helps other developers do their job better. And that is an amazing feeling. So go out there and just enjoy working with Pest, with Laravel, creating your projects and building awesome things. You can find me on Twitter at LukeDowning19. Come say hi. You can find me on GitHub and see the work that I do at Luke Raymond Downing. And thank you again for listening. I really appreciate your time, guys. I'm going to hand back now, and I'll say see you later.
Okay, thanks a lot, Luke. Can you hear me? Luke, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, Luke. I know you're on holiday and we are troubling you, but thanks.
Thanks for having me. Sorry, I'm streaming from a subpar microphone in the holiday bedroom. So
That's fine. That's fine. So, Luke, let's give audience a few moments to ask questions. You ready to take questions? So, do we have any questions for Luke? There's a bit of delay in the live stream, so you may be hearing this a bit late, but if you have any questions, please put your questions as comments in the chat box. So, Luke, we have a first question from Nuno. How do you find that much time to open source, Luke?
I think I enjoy a job. So yeah, be careful not to burn out. You need to certainly have other things to do other than just code. But yeah, I tend to spend quite a lot of my free time writing new features for Pest and Laravel and my own things. So I guess that's why. And I have no children either. That always helps.
Great. I also have a couple of questions for you, Luke, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So my first question is, what is the advantage of using Pest over PHP unit? Can you please explain to the beginners, I mean, the people who are picking up testing for the first time, so what should they look for in Pest that will help them write better tests over PHP unit?
Yeah, I want to be careful not to disparage PHP unit, because without PHP unit there would be no Pest. So it's more of a case of pick which one fits your team better. If you work with JavaScript and you're building, let's say, a Vue.js application alongside your Laravel application, Pest will very much feel familiar, because if you're using, say, and just share the very similar syntax. If you're using a lighter IDE, the auto-completion for Pest isn't quite as good as PHP unit. So PHP Storm has an amazing plugin that Olive to and writes and maintains, and it gives you full auto-completion. So if you're in PHP Storm, Pest is really amazing, and auto-completion works beautifully. But in VS Code, it's not quite as fluent. VS Code struggles to pick up on this auto-completion, for example. So if that's an issue for you, go for PHP unit. Or if your team's used to PHP unit and you're really struggling to get them onto Pest, go for PHP unit. But the advantage of Pest is that you save so many lines of code. So in one application that we worked on, converting from PHP unit to Pest, which you can do with a Laravel shift that Jason McCreary creates. So if you've not used Laravel shift before, it's an amazing service. You pay like it's moving Laravel, automating PHP unit to Pest. So we ran that on an application that is a real application we work on daily, and we saved 10,000 lines of code. So I hope that's kind of an indication of how much more concise Pest is over PHP unit. And that's just thanks to all the little things like there is no class that you have to declare. You're not declaring method names, you're writing in clean strings. So it's much more concise, and I think that leads to more readable. It means that you think with I want to say a more concise mindset. So rather than just shoving code in there and making it work, you're actually attempting to think about how to make the test look nice as you go. And I would say all in all, over my time of using Pest, it's certainly improved how I test as a developer. So I think it would just be worth saying to a beginner to try each one. Don't put one aside and think, well, we'll just go with this. Try each one, play with it in a real project for a day or two, and then
I think we lost you.
nope. I
Can you hear me?
hear that you think you're lost. Yeah, I'm back. Where did I disappear?
That's fine. I think you completed your answer. So let me see if we have any more questions. Okay, so I have one more question. Right now, Pest primarily goes and works well with Laravel, right?
Mhm.
So I believe this is a question for both you and Nuno, if he's still around. So do you guys have any plans to make it more compatible with other frameworks like Symfony or let's say Cake PHP?
Difficult to say. We've had people reach out to us on this. I mean, I know you can use Pest in those frameworks. It's certainly not as smooth for the reason that we all work in Laravel every day. We're not Cake PHP developers, and if I'm being 100% honest, I've never used Cake PHP. Came into PHP, I was using PHP raw, kind started as a WordPress developer and then worked to Laravel, and then everything's kind of been Laravel for me from there on out. But I've personally had people reach out to me and ask if they could work on integration of Cake PHP, for example, with and it really is in some ways down to the framework itself. So as an example of that, Laravel works so well with parallel testing because Laravel took it upon themselves to write the feature set that allows for advanced parallel testing when it comes to things like database setup. And I think it will come to the point in the future where Pest continues to grow in popularity, and it is taken upon the framework maintainers to add support and make sure that everything works with Pest. And we will aid along the way. And if there's a big demand for it, obviously we'll do it. But the primary focus for us, because we use it day in, day out on Laravel, is probably Laravel at the moment. But don't quote me on anything, because as I say, I don't use Cake PHP.
Yeah.
So go try it in Cake and in Symfony, in that, certainly in basic PHP. I've done a lot of Pest with like PHP agnostic.
Okay.
And I think in the future, if the demand is there will be probably plugins that help with those particular frameworks.
Okay. Thanks for answering that question, Luke. We have one more question by Joseph.
No,
Can you please explain the advantages of abstracting the test case instead of using the pest file?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, if you have been writing your tests in PHP unit and you come over, obviously don't have a pest.php file that you've been maintaining. So if you just use, say, the shift converter, if you've gone ahead and done that and you're now in Pest, I want to note that the helpers that if you've already written helpers or test them just fine. There is a line that will execute things is if you've got a function, a global function that you declared in the pest.php file, that's like the first layer. So that will be called first. And then it will look in the test case. So you can kind of think of that as CSS. You know how you got your CSS specificity. And sometimes you want a deep specificity where you want to target an exact thing. And in other occasions, you want a high level of specificity where you say generally, so we added as user is going to be class. Unit tests will be dealing with a class. I will never call as user in a unit. So rather than putting it on the global pest.php file, which would have been valid but available everywhere, I opted instead to put it in the feature test case. So it's only available for feature tests. So it acts as a form of segregation, but at the end of the day, it's what you're most comfortable with. You saw, for example,
I think we lost you again, Luke.
It's going to fill up very quickly. So if you are,
maybe Luke, you can turn off your video. That will improve the. Okay. Yeah, Luke, please turn off your video. I think that will give you a bit more bandwidth. Hello.
I I think the Wi-Fi may just have given up here.
No problems, no problems. Anyways, I think that is it for tonight. Thanks a lot, Luke, for joining us. Your talk was really informative, and I hope this will inspire many of us to pick up Pest PHP.
Yeah, I hope so too. And like I said, go try it. Don't just go.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to try it in our next project.
If you've got something idea to it, anyone in the community can.
Okay, I think Luke is in some remote place and his internet is really choppy. So let's call it a day. Thank you, everyone who joined us tonight or this afternoon, this morning, wherever you are joining from. Thanks a lot, and hopefully we'll see you all next month as well. As you know, Laravel Nagpur, as Laravel Nagpur community, we conduct meetups every month, and it is generally towards the end of the month. And if any one of you wants to present a talk in our next meetup, please get in touch with us, and we'll be happy to host you as a speaker. And once again, Luke, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for your time. Goodbye, everyone. Bye-bye. Cheers.